Welcome to the Morning Phillips series, hosted today on YouTube. The Morning Phillips series, originally hosted at the Garage co-working space in Rapid City, South Dakota, was created to discuss philanthropy, civil society, and community. It is an opportunity to have a conversation with good people doing good things creatively and collaboratively. The format is a conversation, not a presentation. 2 tables, 2 chairs, 2 computers, and a community of interested people watching on their computers. Today, we are pleased to have with us a nonprofit leader, a Minnesotan, and a mother. A special thanks to the Bush Foundation, the Numad Group, and the Garage for hosting today's conversation. Thanks to all those who have joined us for nearly 60 previous in-person conversations. Now, with all that, we are pleased to welcome the president of the Bush Foundation, Jen Ford Reedy. Thank you for joining us, Jen.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, wanted to just jump in and just ask, how has this time been for you and your family?
Surreal. Surreal. It's we are among the most fortunate people in this time of crisis in terms of our own health, in terms of the safety and comfort of the space that we can be in. And both my kids are here with us, my husband, my 2 kids, and I, and we all like each other and get along really well, which is really lucky, and are trying to make the best of this time that we have here together and find some joy together every day.
Are you homeschooling?
No.
Okay.
One of my kids is in college, and so she's just doing her virtual work from here, and then the other is in high school, so he's pretty self-sufficient, so we're not having to actually be school teachers.
Nice. In this time, what is most important as a leader?
I think what's most important right now as a leader is the same thing that's always the most important as a leader, which is basically being able to figure out what people need you to do and need you to be. I think about leadership is fundamentally about the effect you are having on other people, right? That's the point of leadership, to be able to support or inspire some people to do something or be something that they wouldn't without you, right? That's the definition of having an impact as a leader, and that's different in every situation, right? What it means to be a great leader of a group of soldiers in battle is really different than what it means to be a leader of 4-year-olds playing soccer, right? But it's all leadership, and it's really about understanding your context, understanding the people, understanding the needs of that moment, and then continuously saying, is what I'm doing the thing that is people most need me to do right now, and adjust until that answer is yes. And then it will only be yes for a minute, because the moment will change and then you'll need to adjust. But anybody who has an idea that there's a right way to lead and that's constant will be struggling right now, because whatever context they were operating in has changed. And this is a real test of whether leaders are able to adapt to the challenges of the moment and the needs of the people they work with.
Jen, what are you seeing those challenges be? What are you seeing happening right now?
Well, they're different in different institutions and in different kinds of leadership roles. As an organizational leader right now, you have just simple, like, how do we get this work done kind of questions when we're working physically in a different way than we work, right? For us, it's how do we still get our grants out and still have good internal controls for all this money that we're moving. And then, beyond whatever sort of logistics get our work done questions, which are very different for different kinds of organizations, there's so much about supporting the human beings who are involved in trying to do the work in a time of incredible uncertainty and stress, and in some cases, true hardship. I think, for us, the biggest thing has been childcare, and just recognizing that some people just frankly aren't able to work right now, or work, a couple hours a day right now, and say, that's great. That's what you can give right now, and that's what we'll take. And so then it's adjusting everything else to fit whatever capacity the individuals have. And that changes every day, individual to individual.
And you're leading not only the organization, the Bush Foundation, but and the staff that you've built, but as a leader in the nonprofit world and in the nonprofit sector, you're a leader across this region. What are you seeing across this region as the head of the Bush Foundation that's changed?
Well, I think for all different kinds of leaders and all different kinds of roles, people are just having to make decisions that they didn't think was possible. To operate in ways they would have said were impossible or unrealistic, and make really, really painful decisions that they would have done anything they could to avoid. So I think you have people who are at the limits of their past experience and beyond for understanding how to manage through a time when there isn't a precedent. I mean, we just don't know. And I think about our Bush Foundation role in the world, and how can we be the most useful? Is it right now? Is it 6 months from now? Is it on public health related things? Is it on things related to financial crisis? Is it related to physical safety? Is it, what are all those variables? And trying to look what you can from the past to say, okay, what does it look like to come out of a recovery? And saying like, well, I don't know that that's going to apply in this situation. We're in a lockdown in a lot of ways, and so a recovery from that we haven't really seen or experienced to know how many of those people who are unemployed are going to get their jobs back right away, how many aren't, how many businesses are going to be able to pop back open, how many aren't, and so it's really, really hard to model. So you're just having to make decisions every day, so many decisions every day, with a degree of uncertainty that is just really, really, really unusual for any leader.
And what grounds you in that?
Well, I think accepting the limitations of what you know and can know, and saying, knowing that you as a leader have to make the best decision you can with what is known, what's knowable. And I think trying to do scenario planning to the best you can. So you have, I'm going to do this, and then if this happens, we'll do this. And but it's staying flexible and to some extent having a gentleness with yourself to know that you can only know what you know, and you can do the best you can.
You led the Bush Foundation to make drastic changes to your grant programs in response to COVID-19 pandemic. Would you talk about the changes and why you made those, and how you made those so quickly in response to what's happening and for this region?
Sure. So we're able to move quickly in part because we've done a lot of disaster planning, both as a staff, but then also with the board. And we've had for years, every year, some conversation about what will we do when the community really needs us? What will we do when our investments crater, which they have? Not if, but when. And so because we'd done that, I had a pretty good idea where the board was on how we want Bush Foundation to show up in a time of crisis. So that gave me a lot of ability to act with confidence in making some quick early decisions. Our purpose statement is around problem solving in the region. And a lot of our strategy is about trying to be available and being a partner on problem solving. So a number of the programs that we haven't changed, like community innovation grants, actually work really well in a time of changing needs in the community because they're not tied to any particular issue. It's about people coming together to solve problems. So there was a lot of our strategy that I feel like we didn't need to change. It worked. But in other areas where we could, we tried to redirect resources and definitely have a principle of first do no harm. I mean, one thing that can be a challenge for foundations is they really, really, really want to help when there's a crisis, but in order to help, you have to take money away from another organization or set of organizations that were expecting that funding, and then you're creating another problem over here. So we have not wanted to do that. but we've looked hard to say where are those areas where we can, without causing harm, repurpose resources. And one of those for us was the Bush Prize. The Bush Prize, we love that program. It's this flagship program to us. It's important to us, but no one was counting on the Bush Prize. The Bush Prize, you don't know that you're going to get it. So by not offering it, some people were disappointed, but it's not like anyone was counting on that and it was going to cause a real disruption. So that was one that was easy for us to say, let's not do that this year. And 100% of that money has gone out to relief funds, collaborative relief funds in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and across the Native nations.
Those relief funds are doing a variety of things, and you're purposely collaborating with folks in the states and Native nations to be on the ground. Is that correct?
Yes, we are definitely taking an approach that is wherever we can work collaboratively and give money to community level or state level decision makers who know better what needs are on the ground. But also, in a time of crisis in particular, a real advocate for pooled funds and shared staffing. So there's one place for nonprofits to go instead of managing multiple applications. And there also, hopefully, is some shared decision making that really gets the best intelligence possible of what the needs are in that place, to be able to make better decisions than a bunch of funders would have been able to make individually. So we've definitely had that as our lead strategy to work through those collaborative organizations. You know, it's interesting. A downside for us, for me as a person who's trying to, first and foremost, tend to the culture of the Bush Foundation. Our staff wants to be doing more, and there's some part that's contributing to these shared collaborative efforts. That means we're not as hands-on in it and don't feel the impact as much. So we've been trying to really, really celebrate what we see those funds doing and where they're giving the money and what's happening with it, because we are definitely, another degree removed from impact when we operate that way. But I think it's the right thing to do.
As the leader of the Bush Foundation, how have you kept that culture as people are working remotely, as one of the major function, as you just described, that your staff and you do has been changed because of this?
I do think that culture tending is one of the most important roles of a CEO of an organization. And what that looks like when we're all dispersed is quite different. So part of it is communicating like crazy, and part of it is finding opportunities and to show as much support as we can for people when they need it and create opportunities to support each other. And part of it is trying to have fun and find as much joy as possible. So I start every day with a good morning email and end every day with a wrapping up email. That's sort of here's what you need to know, but it's also some fun. And so we have on day one of remote work, we started the Bush Foundation Remote Work Mega Fun Challenge, BFRWMFC. And every day we have a challenge that everyone's competing in. So part of the good morning email is announcing what that challenge is. Today's challenge is it's about my colleague Jackie. She's the daily challenge master. And it's how many outfits will her 3-year-old daughter Nina wear in the course of the morning. That's the challenge for the day, and everyone has to guess. So it's silly, it's fun, but it's a way of making sure that everyone has a pull into each other and feeling connected, and even when it's silly, it helps build that feeling that we are a group, we are a team, we're a family.
What do you suppose the new normal is as we make it through COVID-19 and all the changing social norms?
I don't know. I mean, it's fun to just speculate about it. Like I'm a hugger, and I live in a world of huggers, and thinking, will we go back to that? Are we going to be huggers that same way again? I hope the new normal is better than the old normal in a lot of ways. So some of it is how intentional can we be about what we want the new normal to be. There'll be some things that we can't really affect, but there's a lot that we can. And I think for each of us in our lives, choosing what is it about how we operate now in this unusual time that we want to make part of the new normal, and what are those things we didn't like in the old normal that when we're in this moment of recovery, rebuilding, we could think about differently. I think crises are hard for obvious reasons by definition, and they're also opportunities. And I think right now sometimes it's hard to talk about the opportunity part while people are suffering and scared. But there will be lots and lots of opportunity for us to think differently. I think we talked earlier about the fact that a lot of organizations are doing things they didn't think is possible. So can they remember that mind? Can they remember that? Can they remember that, oh, you know what? A lot of things that we imagine needed to be this way don't actually have to be this way. I am chair of a hospital board, and they've had to reimagine so many different processes around safety, like just thinking about how many people one patient interacts with in the course of a visit, for example. They've radically changed that. And then it's sort of like, well, why did we ever do it that other way? Like, why can't we always do it that way? And I think, in small ways, there'll be those kinds of changes for all kinds of organizations. And then it's how do we have some of those bigger conversations?
Are there things at the Bush Foundation or at the hospital, like the example at the hospital, that you and your team looks at now and says, why didn't we think about this way before we were forced to? Are there learnings like that you're seeing already? Or is
Yes, for sure. And some of them are small, like different processes for signing things, right? We can do that in an easier way. Like that's a little victory that we can claim, and we won't go back on that. And I think that'll be more easily true. It's pushing harder on the bigger questions about what would we want to be different.
And letting go of the idea that we're going to be back to the same normal maybe that we had 3 months ago. And I think of what you talk a lot about, what's throughout your website, think bigger, think differently. And I wonder if you have thoughts on, as we look at and speculate what the future is going to be, how do we keep that in mind?
I think it's in every aspect of recovery and rebuilding, it's literally, how do you keep that question in mind? Like, how do you put that question in front to say, can we make this better than it was? And have that be one of your operating questions when you're shifting back into recovery mode or rebuilding mode. So I think for our community innovation grants, for example, as people are doing a lot of creative problem solving around the region to recover, the question we are asking as program staff is, how will it be better afterward because of what you're doing now? And thinking explicitly about that as part of the consideration, that there are ways to make different kinds of choices in how you set up a process around recovery. How much is there actually a visioning process for what's possible versus just an assumption that you're trying to normalize to the old normal? And if you are one of the people involved in those processes, you can ask, like, what's the opportunity for better? And you can think about a process that does involve some different kinds of visioning, imagining in the early stages of the process that can help break out of that thinking of just, we're trying to get back to what was.
If we switch gears a little bit, you're a big reader. Are you finding time to read these days? And
I have to find time to read. I have to find time to read. I never not reading. I wouldn't be able to sleep, I think, otherwise. Reading is how I get out of what I've been thinking about all day and get my brain working at a different speed and a different way.
Is there a book that that you're reading today?
right now I'm reading a biography of the Dalai Lama.
Mm.
I'm a big fan of the Dalai Lama. I find a lot of his teachings, lessons really, really helpful for me and how I navigate in the world. But I don't know that much actually about his life. So I'm enjoying getting a little more understanding of his very, very complicated life and the complicated politics around it.
How about poetry or art? Do you have
What?
how about poetry or art? Do you have
Um,
a favorite poet or artist?
I'll do artist,
Hmm.
which is my mom. This behind me is one of my mom's pieces. But art was very integrated into my life always. And in my family, we all practice art. Like art is something that you do. You don't just
Hmm.
admire. And we paint and draw and do things as part of sort of just daily life. But this is, I don't know if you can tell that those are paint can lids behind me.
No.
So my mom worked with recycling centers all over. She's in Kansas, and to get the paint cans that people recycle, and then those are actually the colors from the paint
Wow.
cans. And let's put up my screen. You can see I have two
Mhm.
panels. They go up pretty high in
Oh
my house.
wow.
Woo! Um, but they've had I've been in galleries where there are like 20 of these panels all across this giant wall, and it's amazingly beautiful. But she does a lot of kinds of art, but she is primarily does assemblage, which is found object art, which I love, and I think does make you look at the world differently because you are trying to see what's beautiful in everything around you.
Sure. How do you balance the intensity and constant bombardment of the news and the rest with the rest of life during this time? Ah.
I put myself on a pretty strict news diet more than a year ago. And so I'm careful about my news consumption. I want to know what's going on in the world. I need to know what's going on in the world, but I don't need to know it all the time, and I don't need to know it right as it's happening. So I really try to consume in the morning and at night, kind of in digest
Mhm.
form, and have some news aggregators that I value and trust, and not be on social media, not be watching the news develop all through the day. I found, I guess it was about a year ago, that I was actually hearing the same news over and over and over. I would read the news digest, then read the paper, then I'd listen to the radio on the way into work, and then
Mhm.
I'd check things during the day, and then I'd listen to the radio on the way home from work. And I was realizing I was actually just hearing the same stuff multiple times and getting more stressed by it. And so I'm trying to actually um, consume it once deeply, but not be in constant consumption of news. I was really affected by something I heard around that time, which was basically if we had a newspaper of the decade, how different the stories would be than having daily newspapers, right? If we had a newspaper of the week, how different the stories would be than having minute by minute updates. That the smaller the fragment of news coverage, the more uncertainty there is on how things will play out, and the more concern there is, and the more stressful it is, and that it's in the larger periods of time that we get the context and the fuller story.
Mhm.
And so thinking about trying to, in some ways, lengthen my intervals at least a little bit.
What's changed for you with that then?
I'm happier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not commuting into work now, but I listen to a fun podcast or music, or it's I don't think I'm any less informed.
Hmm.
I know I'm not less informed, but I'm not as consumed by some of the things that are out of my control, and that are sometimes distressing. In the media, for a lot of reasons, um, covers the worst stuff happening in your community and in the world, and it's a lot to process. It's a lot to process, and trying to make sure you're understanding those things, because it's really, I think, super important to understand challenges in the world and problems in your community, but making sure that you're keeping it balanced with the so much that's good in the world. And so it's trying to keep those ratios right.
And our world's in the United States made up of three sectors. Many people talk about the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, and the government sector. Can you talk a little bit about these three sectors in our society and their role, especially now?
Yes, that's one of my favorite topics over the course of my life. I've been really interested in cross-sector work, and that's actually what drew me to work in foundation, is that you get to be involved in cross-sector work. And I think our biggest challenges always require business, government, and nonprofit to bring their unique strengths. And I think that's just so apparent right now. I mean, trying to see what are all those actions required to weather this crisis. So at the biggest level, like just thinking for our country, for the globe, just for our country first, like the government can put out relief money, stimulus money, but you need the businesses to actually keep employees or hire employees or figure out how to manage through to start creating the value that they create in society. And you need the nonprofits to be able to be there for the support system for those who lose jobs or have other kinds of issues that public sector government can't meet. So I think right now, when you're trying to get the whole economy, the whole country to work together, it's the relative roles of the three and the importance of all three, I feel like, to me, is in stark relief. And then at the micro level, one of my favorite examples of something we funded recently is the Minnesota World Kitchen, which I know they have these around the country, but it's basically Second Harvest Heartland, which is our biggest food system nonprofit, working with restaurants to prepare meals that are then delivered by social service organizations to people who need them most. So you're keeping people employed in those restaurants, but just repurposing their talents and their facilities to help those who are most vulnerable. I think that's a pretty fabulous kind of cross-sector problem-solving example.
What is the best piece of advice you've heard or received in the recent weeks?
What's coming to mind is not very related to the moment of crisis. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
I read a book last weekend that was a fiction book, but it was called the Lager Queen of Minnesota. It was this delightful book. I loved it. But there was just this line in there that moved me to tears. But the line was just a throwaway one, that this woman saying that one of the things her mom taught her was that one of the nicest things you can do for someone is be happy to see them. And it really moved me. And I think that is always true. And I think right at this moment, when we're closed off from each other physically, how do you ensure people are seen? How can you see people and be happy to see them and show them that you're happy to see them and that people do? It does mean a lot to people, and it's one of the ways that we can help contribute to the connectedness that's really important for us all managing through this together.
It has a lot to do with what's going on. What advice have you given your team?
Well, we're working really hard on the comfort with ambiguity. We were already actually in a lot of strategy change. So our staff was already in a spot of feeling some stress about not knowing how some things were going to shape up in the course of 2020 at Bush Foundation. And then we put all that strategy work on hold so that we can focus on COVID-19 response related activities. So now it's uncertain with no end date to when we're going to figure it out. And so we've been working hard, talking a lot about, in teams and when we're together, about managing through ambiguity. And we have it at all levels right now in our lives. And that You can wish that there was a more definitive answer, and we can make some up sometimes that make us feel better, but that fundamentally our happiness and effectiveness will be tied to our ability to accept where there's ambiguity and figure out how to operate as well as we can during in those situations.
A good portion of the Bush Foundation is focused on a rural region.
Mhm.
What do you imagine rural looks like for the next generation, especially now after COVID-19?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a number of things related to COVID-19 that I think could be opportunities for rural. I think we've exposed a lot of issues with our supply chains all around
Mhm.
in all kinds of industries. So I think people will be rethinking supply chain and how do you think about where there may be more opportunity for investment um, in the U.S., but then also in communities where there's good workforce availability. I think just the fact that we're all developing wholly different skills around working remotely, I think could be a huge boon for rural communities as people are maybe increasingly liberated to live where they want and be able to get a job, even if it's not a job that's based in that community. I think that could be a big opportunity. I think um, the sense of community and that people want in stressful times, I think could be something that makes rural communities more attractive. And I think actually people will for a long time be real nervous about how close we are to each other and how
Mhm.
many people we're interacting with. And that could be something that makes people want to move away from big cities and into rural areas. I think one of the hardest things for rural communities coming out of this in terms of selling rural as the place to be is actually a healthcare system. Like I think the stories that are about what is the capacity of your healthcare system to deal with crisis, and that's something where rural healthcare has been a challenge for decades, and it just is becoming increasingly so. So I think to address that, we're going to have to really make some big investments in telehealth and other ways to make people who are living in rural areas that don't have the same kinds of healthcare facilities that we do in metro areas feel safe and feel like they could be well supported in a time of disaster.
What have you learned about rural America as over the last 8 years as president of the Bush Foundation? What surprised you, or what's been a learning?
Well, I'll tell you, what's been really, really useful to me in the time I've spent in rural communities is actually seeing how change happens, because you can just see it in a different way in a smaller town. So even in Rapid City, like I remember being in Rapid City, walking around with
Mhm.
you, and there's a little park across from your office, and sort of like,
Yeah.
well, how did that happen? And it's like, well, it was so and so's idea, and then they talked to Bobby Joe at this organization, and then they talked to Fred over here, and Rapid City isn't rural, but you get that sense in smaller towns than what I'm living in myself
Mhm.
um, about how the only things that happen because there's some people who decide it's worth it and they're willing to work to make it happen and convince others to make it happen. And that's always true. That is always how change happens, but you can't see it as well, I think, in bigger communities sometimes, because it feels like institutions make things happen. And you realize, no, that's not actually it. Like the city of St. Paul doesn't do anything, right? There's somebody who works at the city of St. Paul who has an idea, or somebody who tells somebody who works at the city of St. Paul about an idea, and someone believes in it enough to get other people rallied around it. And it's just a reminder that everything we accomplish because of people who were committed enough and had the skills to pull it off. And so if we want to be more, if we want to be better, it's how many more people can we get who are inspired and equipped to make that change happen. People is our great limiter, actually. I mean, it's the engine, people, but it also defines the limits of what we can be. I talk a lot from the Bush Foundation context of as a foundation that cares about place, We can only be what the people in it believe we can be and are willing to work to be. And I think I've only, I think, truly come to understand that as deeply as I do now because of the time I've spent in rural communities, and know that if you want something different to do on Friday nights, you're gonna have to create that thing, because nobody's gonna come in and just create it for you. Like, you have to own it and you have to put in the effort.
Is there a characteristic of those people
Is there a characteristic
of those people that you, what do you recognize in people that do that?
I think it's a different level of ownership of community than maybe people feel sometimes in larger areas. Like, you don't have the sense of mattering in the same way. And I think in rural communities, you can see all over how much individuals matter. And in that is, for some people, a sense of obligation of what they need to do. And I think for some people, a sense of opportunity of what they can do. But it's so obvious to see what difference a person can make, that I think it brings out characteristics that are in all humans, but in that context brings it out in a different way, because they either, again, feel required, or embrace the opportunity. What's going through my head is this, a woman who's on the Bush Foundation board, when she's talking about rural, the way she describes growing up in a rural community is the fact that she was on the basketball team, right? Because she's somebody who, when she says it, it gets a laugh, because she is not physically someone that you think, oh, she's a basketball star. And she's like, you had to be on the team. Like, to have a team, you needed enough people to go out. And that was part of what it meant to be in a rural community, is that you were needed. If you're gonna have a basketball team, you need folks to go out.
And how important that is on all levels of needing and being a part of, being felt that you're needed, and being a part of something bigger.
I think that's right. I think a lot of people right now who are feeling lonely in part because they can't help enough. They don't know how to help. And I think that sense of being needed is really meaningful. All the work that is done internationally on blue zones and those places where people live a long time. A sense of purpose is one of their key findings, that it makes you, one, happier, but it makes you truly live longer to have a sense of purpose. And I think living in a community where your purpose and the need and opportunity for you is so clear, I think can make for a very happy life.
Can we talk a little about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah.
I know that's been a focus and conversation at the Bush Foundation. I looked at the newspapers this morning in the 3 states, and they all have COVID coverage, front page, and in some way they all touch on the impact of COVID on minorities, on homeless, on people that are sometimes most vulnerable. And diversity, equity, and inclusion has been something that you've spoken about, and wanted to just open that up and see what you'd have to say about that.
Well, I think there's a lot that is exposed in times of crisis. But certainly right now, you see how well our systems work for everybody, and the places where they don't work well for everybody. We do spend a lot of time talking about this at the Bush Foundation, and we do not think it's remotely a partisan concern to ask hard questions about how institutions we're involved in or depend on serve people with all different needs. We have quite often created schools, created government programs, created workplaces that can work pretty well for some part of our population, and the skill set and the mindset required to think, wait, does this work for everybody? Is everybody actually benefiting from this program the way we mean it to? Is everybody accessible? Is everybody comfortable? Does everyone feel welcome? Does everyone feel invited? And the ability to analyze any policy, any group you're a part of, any institution, to say, wait, who is this serving well and who isn't? So that requires, disaggregating data to say who is actually being hit hardest by COVID or who is being better served by this program. It means making sure you're having real good conversations with people of all different backgrounds to understand what their experience is, and interacting with you, with your organization, with your program, to say, how is it meeting your needs? How isn't it meeting your needs? And then the ability to adapt any policies, any practices that your institution has to be able to serve everybody better. I think it's a skill set, it's a mindset and a skill set that we need more and more and more and more and more leaders in our region to have. It's essential. I would say, or if we come up with a number one problem for the region, to me, it is having enough leaders in it with that mindset, with that skill set to make institutions work better for everyone. Almost every institution we have in the region needs to change, right? The world's changing, so that needs to happen in general, right? You need to be able to adapt institutions, but particularly as our region diversifies in terms of cultural background, in terms of language, in terms of race, and in terms of the different kinds of economic needs and economic opportunities, we have to be able to adapt our institutions to serve everyone well. And like I said, I'm sad when I see issues of equity seemingly associated with a political point of view, because I think there's so much related to diversity and equity inclusion that is just incredibly practical, necessary skill building and action that's required to make our region as successful as it can be.
If an elected official from one of the 3 states or tribal nations you support called you and asked for your advice, what would you tell them?
I don't know. On anything?
Anything. But maybe
right at this moment,
yes.
I think I'd say, thank you for all you're doing to try and hold things together and lead through a really hard time. And I think to make sure you're pausing and asking some bigger picture leadership questions, particularly what do people need most of me right now? I think you can get in crisis time and sort of how do I respond to this? How do I respond to that? And fill your day and, beyond the limits of your day, beyond what you can possibly get done. And so I think that leadership reflection, what's the most critical thing that people need from me? How do I want people to feel? How do I want people to be supported in this time? And is my frantic activity, because we're all in pretty frantic mode right now, but is it aligned with what's actually the most important leadership needs for the people that I am serving right now?
As we wrap up, any words for the 3-state region and Native nations? Thoughts?
Any words?
Any words to leave with?
I think take care and stay safe. First of all, everything you can do to stay safe. And then I do think that, one of the themes, Matt, that you've been raising about the finding the opportunities to think bigger, think differently, that if we're in the time where we can shift into rebuilding, to not settle, think about what do we want our organizations to be? What do we want our communities to be? What do we want our state to be? What do we want our region to be? And to make sure that we're baking those kinds of questions and that kind of visioning into any of the work we're doing over the next, months and years, as we will be in recovery and rebuilding mode.
Jen, thank you. Thanks for your words.
Thank
and
you.
time. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful way to begin the day. At this time, due to COVID, we're unable to share a small gift with you from the Black Hills Work Susie Kappa Art Center, but instead we're going to make a donation in your name to Susie Kappa Art Center.
Oh, that's great.
Uh,
Thank you. That's lovely.
Well, and thanks everyone for joining us online. Please fill out the survey in the chat box. There's a link there. And stay tuned to learn more about future guests. Jen, thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.